HR has always been perceived as more transactional, more admin. This is one of the reasons why the business community completely lose faith in HR, or they just feel that I don't even think we need HR. They don't see HR as a means of doing better. They see HR as cost.
If I join a company and I'm the only HR, I know that's the kind of life I'm expecting. Unless, is there any way to get out of this loop?
Before you get involved in AI, please ensure that you possess the core competencies in HR. You can't help train AI, all the algorithms, if you don't know the basic 101 of HR. HR's role is not to be popular in a company. The whole discussion on work-life balance is now on a completely different level. All those people hiding behind their desk and back-end offices and laptops and say they are HR, I think that's going to end soon.
How do you first introduce yourself? Because you come from consulting, you come from HR, now you do a bit of both, and you've also been in leadership positions on the HR side. How do you do to introduce yourself and establish trust with people?
I think I will always be that very, very business-driven strategic HR leader with very heavy regional experience. Today, my role is more in capability building. I focus a lot in HR because I work very closely and I represent HRCI in APAC plus India. I have a legal background, and that is a professional background. And I always wished that the HR would be perceived as one. This is, I think, a global phenomenon. I've seen this in every country I've worked. HR has always been perceived as more transactional, more admin, policeman. And I felt that one of the things that's really stopping HR from being perceived otherwise is the value they bring to the company. I think what's really key today I'm able to do is to develop the people in HR with the right HR skills and not just learning it from the colleague next door, which is what normally happens when you join an HR team at a very early age, right? You don't know what you're doing. You are taught by someone within the organization. Many times it's the blind leading the blind. Predominantly, Malaysia has been one of the countries that sees HR as very governance-driven. HR is not just about governance, right? It's not just about adhering to the legislations we have in labor, but it's also about developing an organization that is profitable, driving organization skills. So I guess I'm in the middle right now, but a big chunk of what I do now is also helping SMEs with HR, people, development of skills. So we're talking about capability development and also to a large extent, bench building the right bench, the right capability within organizations. Yeah.
You spoke about an organization, just for the people who don't know it. I think you said HRCIS.
HRCI is a global certification body in HR. It's based out of the US. Our office is in Washington. We've been around for more than 50 years. We're a certification body and our programs are accredited, which, to be honest, is not done by the other certification bodies. What I liked about them is I like the fact that they are more focused on capability, meaning in terms of quality, and not so much about, how many people gets trained or how much money do we make. So it's actually an independent non-profit making organization. It kind of resonated with the values I put in for ProMeritus, because with a lot of work that we do, there's a lot of giving back to the society. From my perspective, it's giving back to the HR fraternity. Trying to create an awareness. I've been trying to create an awareness in HR that they need HR competencies as well as any other function. And you can imagine HR is the frontier in any organization, helping the organization build. So if you want training, you go to HR. If you want to hire someone, you go to HR. Why isn't HR then focused in terms of capability building? How do you make sure you've got the right HR people? How do you know your HR people are competent? From that perspective, I think it's quite new. We embarked on this. We are also working and partnering with HRD Corp because we developed the dual HR certification for Malaysia. So you go through two programs, HRCI certification program and as well as an NHRC, which is the thought leader research arm of HRD Corp. And I think what's really important is if you want to grow, whether into different roles, internal mobility, whether you want to migrate, you need to have something that's recognized globally. If you don't have that, then, organizations can't really understand your actual capability. It's very important to ensure that HR too focuses on the right competencies. So you can also then decide the right HR target operating model for your company, for your sector. That's a little bit of what we've been trying to do. So we embarked on our journey with HRD Corp in 2021. And we're still doing it, developing HR, whether it's within the organization. So we also work with many organizations who have this as a priority within their own company. And of course, we run quite a few public programs.
So when you say we, you're talking about HRCI or you're talking about Promeritus?
Both. Well, in Malaysia, Promeritus is HRCI Malaysia.
Okay, got it. You focus on capabilities. Can you tell us a little bit about how you are developing capabilities? Usually I use the process, system, culture, people, this kind of or mindset instead of culture. So do you have any framework to understand the way you work? And you were talking about the different operating models. Also interesting. I guess that's one of the ways you would be sharing the framework.
A normal target operating model will tell you that you would need to have functions like payroll. I think in every organization there is payroll. Some organizations, payroll is done by finance, right? But normally that's an HR. You still need HR input before you make the payment. So you've got payroll. Yep. And payroll is also, in many organizations today, one of the shared services, right? So depending whether you have X number of offices in the region or X number of offices or subsidiaries within a country. The other function, of course, is talent acquisition. That involves selection, that involves recruitment. In the past, there was training and development, which is now called as learning and development. It's understanding the skills you need within the organization. You conduct training need analysis. You pretty much also drive the competency frameworks of within each function, in addition to making sure the business competencies that you have developed or prioritizes for your company is there. And then as you move on to leadership roles, you've got your leadership competencies. So that's from a learning and development. Now, learning and development, TA, and we have what we call compensation benefits or rewards. These are all specialists within an organization. They pretty much do more of a deep dive than anything else. So they work with some of the stakeholders, they work with business partners in HR to ensure that different divisions achieve what they need to. And then in Malaysia, one of the busiest department, I'm sure, is the industrial relations, IR. So this is where they ensure that what do you do if you have issues with employees' performances, if they're doing any misconduct, how do you deal with individuals? And of course, in smaller capacities, when you are an SME or in micro SMEs, you normally have the finance person doubling up as HR, particularly on the governance side. So we're talking about statutory contributions, we're talking about payroll, doing all the things that you have on your checklist. And these are some of the functions that's there. And of course, in recent times, you've got departments that manage employee engagement, making sure people are happy, you're doing the right thing. Also driving specific priorities or mandates like diversity. The DEI has become quite popular, except that now Trump's not a big fan of DEI. So people are putting their legs on their brakes and say, okay, let's not do this too much. And I think an overall aspect is trying to get HR to support businesses to drive organizational success. If you look at in the old frame, you will see one individual pretty much doing a little bit of everything. But again, it's pretty much in the area of managing it. So it's more transactional, or in terms of governance, what you have to do and you have to show proof. And the other parts, which are quite fluid, roles like HR business partnering, which is actually a generalist role. In some organizations, HR business partners are more like the postman who gets a message from a department, passes it on to the right COEs or the specialists within HR, and try to ensure that that particular request is attended to. But I have seen post-pandemic, some of these roles are consolidating. So what you're seeing now is you would have talent acquisition, recruitment, learning, and even some of the people who are involved in employee engagement or even the retention aspect coming under a larger umbrella called the talent management, which kind of takes you a 360 from selecting the right person, recruiting the right person, developing that individual, and retaining them. I have seen that happening as well. But overall, when you're talking to a stakeholder, they don't really care if you are a COE or whatever your title or your position is. They just want to make sure that they get some support. So because of that, I remember when I was an HR director, a CHRO, I've always made sure that people don't work in silos. Everybody in HR will need to understand the big picture, the purpose, and how do we actually support each other, and how do we actually even work with stakeholders.
You started to talk about it, but I need to ask. So you talk about all these different functions. How do you do it when you are one HR person in the company and you need to do everything? How is it possible?
No. Well, firstly, when you are one person in an organization, you focus on the governance. So what happens is you will ensure that you pay on time, it's accurate, you're paying over time. And in the recent times, we've had quite a few revisions to the Employment Act. 48 hours a week is now 45. If you exceed that 45 hours a week, it's overtime. These are all governance you pay. And you would focus on the things that your organization wants to do or what your boss wants to do. And when you're one person, you actually end up taking a lot of instructions. It's very hard for you to set a strategy and drive it. It's quite difficult. And normally when you are one person, you're pretty much in an SME. And if you are in a micro SME, the chances are you have another function, which is normally finance or administration. You only can do so much of HR. And then the question is, how competent are you in HR? I don't mean the governance. I mean developing. I'll give you an example. Even if you're one person and you've got an organization that's losing people, your CHRO is going to ask you, how are we going to solve this? Now, we are not just losing anyone. We're losing the good guys. We're losing the high potential. So how can we understand what's going on and come up with a solution? So if you are a very governance-driven individual, making sure you pay on time and you do everything by the book, you're not going to be able to answer your CEO. You're not going to be able to understand, where do I start with this? How do I know? And it's not about conducting exit interviews. Exit interviews is just one way of you knowing why people are leaving. And most people are super polite in doing exit interviews. They're not going to tell you this stuff. When you don't understand or you don't know the principles of HR, the things that you can do, then, you keep being perceived as just admin. And this is one of the reasons why the business community completely lose faith in HR, or they just feel that I don't even think we need HR, right? So the value add to the organization doesn't quite happen. So people will just take you as somebody who's going to make sure that you dot the I's and cross the T's and the admin is done. One person will not be able to do all of it, but it also depends the sector you're in and what do you really take care. I mean, if you are somebody who is part of a company who's got 15, 20 people, then you don't need a big number of people. Plus, the other thing is, Patty, we should be very automated by now. If the organization who's got one person is heavily automated, then there are a lot of things that individual can do differently. But the problem is automation isn't quite there yet. I know we're already talking about AI. If you're still using Excel sheets and you don't have any automation, how do we end up talking about AI? Yeah, it's hard. So to your question, again, we've had lots of individuals who've come to us and asked us, okay, how do I grow my career? What's my career path? I like HR. I actually like HR better than I do finance. What do I have to do? So we kind of help them with the career path, get them to understand what are they missing in what they do and how to bridge the gap. And also to help them start planning their own careers. And if it's not something that, and in many organizations, if they can't grow, meaning they can't apply what they learn, then some of them have sought employability elsewhere.
Yeah. If we take this specific case you talk about, so I'm obviously in SMB, otherwise you would die if you had a very big organization to support with one person. So probably an SMB, let's imagine that the SMB is growing and it's positive, but still you're the only person. I totally hear you on I need to take instructions and the priorities are probably going to be set by someone else. So you take those instructions. How do you elevate yourself from that kind of order taking and following the instructions to having your blueprint, your roadmap, and implementing something a bit more proactive? And how do you get to negotiate or reprioritize based on what you know about HR? I'm starting to give answers to my own question, but basically, how would you take it as a one man shop or one person?
Well, the first question I normally ask, and I do quite a bit of one-to-ones with participants who want to do programs which they kind of not fulfill the prerequisites. So the first question I normally ask is, do you like HR? And what is HR? If I were to ask you to just describe what HR is to you. And I also ask them, do you like people? Because like it or not, even if you are in a shared services, you are dealing with people. If the answer is yes to all of that, and then I start helping them with a purpose. Because normally the ones who come knocking on our doors are pretty sure that they don't have what it takes to jump out in terms of employability. So many of them would actually ask the question, so what is it that I'm not doing right, or am I doing anything wrong? I said, well, there's nothing wrong in what you're doing, except that you probably don't have some of the skills that some of the other organizations expect you to have. And they're not governance. They are skills which you develop by working with the business. And one of the most fundamental thing that I've experienced over my 30 years, and not just in Malaysia, same thing happened in Pakistan, in China, is they don't really get to understand, they don't want to understand the business. My predominant sector has been FMCG retail. It's a little easier to understand that because you're also a consumer. And understanding the business means what exactly makes the business tick? How do I actually help the business to do better? And it's not about, oh, am I pro-employee? No, there's no question of that. Question is, do you understand what makes us successful? And then going backwards in understanding, because we have people, what do people have or what do people need to have in order to make our business successful? The skills that you need to possess in various functions is important. For HR, if you are an SME, you're never going to feel that you don't know enough because everybody comes to you. You're the only individual there. But then as and when you start dealing and working or even interacting with other people in HR, you start understanding, oh my God, I don't do any of those. I don't even know if I can tell my CEO what we need to do to stop people from moving. I don't even know what the real reason people are leaving. So when you're not in touch with reality like that, you can't solve problems. HR skills, meaning you need to understand what you have to do in some cases. And in most cases, you also need to understand why you're doing it. And if it's not working, there's no hard and fast rule about certain things you're trying. If certain things they're not working, then you try something else. But you got to understand, what are you up against? The organization versus market. How are we doing versus the market, the competitors? What is it that we have or don't have compared to the market? And how do you develop some of the skills? So particularly in organizations where you are trying to get people to do more, it's very easy to say, okay, we're cost cutting, so you will have to do finance and HR, or you will have to do operations and supply chain, for example. But the question is, how do we equip this individual with skills in these areas? It's not just about making sure your manager just gives instructions. The management style or the leadership style needs to be more collaborative. You need to teach these individuals how to do certain things and tell them why, so they too can grow. And HR has a lot to do with that area. I certainly did. Even though it's not my area, that's not my core competency, but as HR, I support them to develop those skills or even find the right individuals with those skills. I think if an HR individual, an HR manager, or whatever they're called, they want to excel in HR, they want to move up, and they've got a goal to be a CHRO in, I don't know, in 10 years, 8 years, then they need to have a plan. You don't want to move up the ladder from a salary perspective, but not from a accountability perspective.
If we go back to the one person in HR, and we could apply it to a bigger group, what are the percentage or the share of time you should put on different tasks, like different programs, different ways of operating with the team. I'll give you an example now. Could be workforce administration versus talent engagement versus performance management, to give just a breakdown, artificial. It could be also the time you take engaging with people, the type that as listening more than giving, the time you take training, the time you take designing the programs. How do you split your time to be effective?
When you're one person, the chances are you're more of a generalist. When you are a generalist, normally you won't have the time to do too much of deep diving because you're kind of going this way, because you're touching everything that's in your space. Yes, you would get involved in making sure the people you hire, the company hires, gets the letter, maybe they're onboarded, but you will also make sure that the discipline is managed. This is again governance, making sure there's no tardiness issue. You don't have any real disciplinary issue with the people in your company. If you are doing performance reviews or performance management, then you would ensure that these individuals they have their reviews on time, the one-to-one. I can't see them being directly involved in KPI setting. So normally the KPIs would come from the business or the divisions, but HR needs to know enough to challenge them if they don't believe in them. When you have those kind of roles, then normally you are a little senior and you know exactly how to measure if your KPIs are smart, and you can actually continue using them for the entire year. But you will also be involved in things like a lot more admin, actually, preparation of letters, making sure resignation is processed. And normally you will also be responsible for the office when you're one person, because trust me, no other function would take over the office admin. It will be HR. So you got to make sure that you've got all the stuff that you need, lights are off, a lot of that. Basically, this puts you responsible for the people. Everything to do with people would be on your list. Also, driving some of the key initiatives from the CEO or your MD, for example, to do what he wants you to do. I've even asked this question. The one thing that we focus a lot on the HRCI for mid-level and senior level is to ensure that you possess a certain number of years of professional level HR experience. Now, that would mean you have the ability to come out with your own opinion, your judgment. So your judgment counts, and you have certain decision-making authority. That autonomy counts. If you don't have any of this, then you're not deemed as someone who possesses professional level HR experience. People in shared services sometimes try very hard to get some, but, because they pretty much work behind the scenes, they end up just doing more and more transactions, very transactional. Ultimately, you will still focus on whatever's being told to you rather than what's on your JD.
Got it. If I join a company and I'm the only HR, I know that's the kind of life I'm expecting. Unless, is there any way to get out of this loop? Because the pantry will still be there. The office management, turning the lights off, some of it cannot be compressed. This time will be taken away from you being able to have a strategic role in the company. Why would you go to such a company then?
Yeah, well, that's why I would ask the question, how much of technology do we use in what we do in HR? I mean, if you have more automation, even if you have a system, doesn't do a lot. It might not be Workday, it might not be SuccessFactors, but if you've got a lot of all the basics all taken care of, then I actually think you can do more. That's a very important question you got to ask is how much in HR is automated, meaning there's a system. The second question I normally ask is if there's a matrix reporting, because in some organizations, they're multinationals, they have small offices, but they always have a matrix reporting. So when you have matrix reporting, it's the mandate of HR that is on you to do some HR stuff needs to be done irrespective of what your CEO thinks. From that perspective, even if you want to do something different or something more, you can actually use your matrix line to influence that. But if you're only reporting to business, meaning the CEO or anyone that you report to in that country, you wouldn't have anyone else to support your initiatives.
Okay. That brings me to actually something that I would have liked to talk to you about. HR, I feel lots of the programs are indirect impact and long-term impact, especially the talent development. How do you work with that problem at the moment? How to measure indirect, long-term?
Now, one of the key issues in talent development today is there's not a lot that is happening within an organization. And usually when it comes to meeting someone with a certain talent, you actually end up going out. You would actually find somebody from outside the company than inside. Even if you do, within your internal mobility programs and policies, you find the right person, or you do find someone who is taking over, say, for example, general manager of supply chain. One of the key issues companies have is they don't have a set competencies for supply chain, let alone for GM. So you have nothing to benchmark against. Another reason for that is because you also do not have any development programs. So when you promote a supply chain manager to a general manager supply chain, he might be functionally strong in supply chain, but he might lack the ability to come up with strategy or on the leadership front. Talent development for this individual will have to include a few things, ensuring that some of the more critical functional competencies needs to be added. He certainly needs to have a few points on leadership, because now you're not just leading within the organization, you're going to be also interfacing with your clients outside the organization or partners. And you need to make sure that the new KPIs that he's got as GM for supply chain is right and he is achieving it and measuring that. When I say measure, I don't mean measure in check every day and stuff like that. But I think the whole concept of continuous improvement, continuous feedback doesn't quite happen in reality. Everybody talks to the employee maybe in the beginning of the year when they have those KPIs and they hand them over. And they talk to them again, probably if you're lucky during mid-year reviews. And if you don't have mid-year reviews, it's just at year end. You don't really have too much time to really see how he's coping. I remember during my days, we used to have a 10-minute coffee every week or every other week just to see how things are going. It doesn't have to be even a formal setting. Measurements are done based on those KPIs that you've set. And another thing is you can't go keep changing the KPIs. The goalpost is the goalpost. If these things are not done, then this guy who's done really well as a supply chain manager might not be able to do as well as we wanted him to as the general manager of supply chain, because the gaps that he's got has not been addressed, nor have we equipped him with sufficient skills to support him. Because we somehow think that the moment you promote someone, they're deemed to be successful. That's not necessarily the case, particularly when you're moving from an operational role to a strategic role. But I am a firm believer that it's virtually impossible to get all strategic if you don't understand how the operations work. But your stakeholder management, your stakeholder communication, all of that becomes a lot more apparent when you are a GM of supply chain. And not to mention negotiations with external parties, vendors, suppliers, third-party logistics. So I think these are some of the things that needs to put in place on the IDP, and we support them.
Okay. Now you assume that the support and the talent development was agreed or launched by the top management team. How do you do to get that agreement that this is something we want to do? Because what it feels is like there are priorities. Like, let's say we need to grow sales, we need to open a new country, we need to blah, 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 like plenty of business objectives. And then you want as HR to enable those business objectives. Everyone is trying to do them from a functional standpoint. So I'm usually taking care of go-to-market strategy, partnerships. So I'm going to have lots of pressure to do that. And in the back of my mind, there are some HR, I don't call them HR, but team management, culture, all training, etc., tooling. But how do you make sure that each and every lead has this way of thinking and that the HR team has the mandate and the budgets in order to invest the kind of programs that you were describing for that particular GMF supply chain? Because most of the time, it feels those programs are not existing or they're not so good, or like the investment is half-heartedly because we need to give tools. Otherwise, there's only pressure and no solutions. But so how do you pitch those programs so that they are properly funded and the investment is really made in order for you to get what you were talking about earlier? Because my problem is more to get the program to start more than how to run it.
What, the learning program? Do you mean the learning program?
Any kind of program that is HR. And that's what I know that my questions are not very well put, but basically, if you cannot measure perfectly the training and then how it impacts the job. So basically, is it having an impact? And is impact, can it be attributed only to the training? No, probably not, to many other factors. And then there's the long term, because if you just promote me to the GM of whatever, and I don't have the skills, I'm probably going to take 6 months, 1 year, 2 years. Maybe those leadership skills that I need to have, I'm going to take 5 years to acquire them fully. And meanwhile, the business, it was a yearly target or it's a quarterly target in sales or even a monthly one. So there's this disconnect between how deep the work needs to be for you to level up and how superficial the tools are given in order to get there. I know that when you have the aura and the charisma and the experience of someone like you, those conversations are easier. But for someone in HR who has less capacity and maybe less close to the business, how do you get them to get the help they need? Because most of the time they will say, no, I don't need this. It's like you have someone with a squared wheel and you said, look, I have the good wheel. The one that, no, I don't have time for this. Let me keep going with my squared wheel.
Okay, so let me start by giving you an example. Normally, going back to the example I just said, supply chain manager to GM, okay? Let's use that as an example. Now, before the individual gets promoted, that's clearly outlined the things that needs to be done in order to support him. This is based on experience, right? So we have what we call an individual development plan, where, because he would have been a result or a product of what we call the talent review that we do, right? So in there is clearly stated his strengths and areas that we feel he needs to do better, the areas of development. So by then, before he even becomes a GM, we would have already agreed on a couple of things. I'm not saying a lot, but at least 2 or 3 items which he needs to develop. Now, that could be, the timelines could be very different. It could be 12 months, 18 months, you name it. But these are things that we would have already agreed with the business. And by the way, most of my organizations, in fact, all except one, have been multinationals. The suggestions on the development actually doesn't come from HR. It comes from the the department. And we agree on what they are and how do we get that to them. Where HR steps in a lot would be in the areas of, say, management, leadership, and in some scenarios, also businesses. So the functional capability building is always within the department. So they would tell us, okay, now he's very good in doing this, but he's not very good in negotiating with third-party logistics. We will agree that communication skills could be an area that he needs to beef up. But when we put these things on paper, the investment part, at least for Malaysia, of course, not the other countries. In Malaysia, most of this would have been covered by HRD Corp levy. You don't really have to fret over it, unless it's leadership programs or executive coaching. Yes, we would budget. Normally for leadership type programs, we do budget. We have a separate budget within. But the rest of the actual training or learning and development, we would use the levy. But it's also for this individual to understand that whatever's been agreed needs to be done. And I normally have, in some case, high potentials, I normally have a quarterly meet with, say, the supply chain director to discuss this individual. He would have the same kind of KPIs for a general manager of supply chain. So we're not going to let him buy some time and not get assessed or measured. No. So while he's developing his gaps, bridging those gaps, he would still be on a KPI or a KRA objectives like everybody else. And normally for internal mobility, high potential promotions, as the HR director, CHR, I normally have a coffee every quarter, twice a year to have any questions if he has any questions. Many times the issue is not so much the development of the individual, it's usually the chemistry between him and his superior. Because when you were a -2 and then you become a -1 to the supply chain director, you work very differently with the supply chain director. In many times, it's about ensuring that he's able to understand the leadership style, what's the director like, and delivering. Not a lot that HR can do in this space except facilitate sessions. The supply chain director will also need to take quite a bit of effort to ensure that these individuals who are promoted are also performing and to give us a heads up if something's up and that we need to intervene. So we usually make sure that everything's okay, the development is done, and the measuring is done in a proper way as well. In terms of investment, as I said, it would be based on budget. In a normal organization, you would have already put a budget in your annual budget, your year plan. You would have already budgeted a certain amount for all your high potentials who's moving into roles in that year, that calendar year. So you know who needs to use how much and what exactly you need to arrange. And in some cases, we also have discussions with his minus one, so the GM's minus ones, to make sure there's harmony in there. Because remember, he's being a GM for the very first time, and all his previous colleagues are now his minus one. That's not always very easy, because from having a group of people who were all your friends because they were all your peers, they are now your minus one. So we also do a little bit of check-in on that. How's things going? Any issues? And also with the team. So it's quite a 360. It's not just about the individual and his skills. It's also about how he is being perceived by his minus ones and how is he managing his colleagues, so meaning other GMs in other functions, and of course his superior. And most times we take about 18 months in terms of the skills. And the other thing we used to do, and I'm a huge fan of the Kirkpatrick model, the 70-20-10. So what you learn in programs or classrooms or online, whatever you do, that's just 10%. We have a 20%. We normally assign them to somebody as a mentor to help them cope with that transition to being a general manager. But a good 70% is application of what you've learned. So every time somebody goes for a program, I normally ask them, okay, what's next? How are you going to roll this out? What do you need? And most people don't do that. The reason they don't do that is because their superiors don't talk about it. They don't talk about application. They don't talk about execution. And I wouldn't call the 70-20-10 a measuring tape, to be honest, but it's certainly one of the best ways of making sure that whoever who's gone for a program or who's attended a particular session comes back and does something with it.
How do you build trust for people to trust you? And you ask them, how is it going with the new boss that was your friend? Or how do you like your director, etc.? So all these conversations are extremely sensitive. HR is, or anyone, you always have multiple agendas, multiple stakeholders you're representing. So how do you have different caps and people trust you to have one cap and not the other one at that point? So how do you manage it?
That's a good question. For me, I've not had too many issues, I think, because I've always been seen as somebody who voices out what I feel and not based on what my bosses tell me. So they've always seen me as an individual who has my own mind. I've got my own mind.
Integrity.
I don't necessarily disagree or agree with what happens around me. I can be the only person in the room who feels differently. And for some reason, I have been perceived that way, which doesn't work very well for me, as you can imagine. But I've always been that person who sees it from a completely different ocular. And I think that has really helped me with trust in people. They would know that if they come and see me, I will do something about it. So when I ask them questions, sometimes they're very coy about it. They're not going to tell you, oh, Mel, I don't think this is going to work. They don't tell me that, but it's what they don't tell me that makes me wonder if something is going on. And I think in terms of prodding, but trust is very important in HR because majority of HR is perceived to be management. Or if I tell HR anything, it's going to go back to my boss. And to be very honest with you, I struggle with that at my mid-management level. So people would find it very difficult to talk about it to certain individuals in my team who are my minus ones. So they would call me directly. And I also make sure that my boss is aware of these things. Because you see, talent management in most companies that I've been in is the agenda of the company. When you have high potentials on your list, these high potentials are the company's responsibility to ensure that we develop them and retain them. So it's not just the supply chain director's job. Every one of us has got an interest to ensure that the general manager of supply chain works out well, not just the supply chain directors. That's how we built the system. The GM of supply chain isn't just the business of the supply chain director. It's the company. So all of us on the leadership team, we discuss talents, by the way, quite openly, twice a year, 3 times a year, just to see how things are going, because you don't have that many talents. So we want to make sure that the talents we have are on the right track. And in one of my organizations, we were also on the regional map. So I not only take part in the country leadership team, I also need to present updates to my regional team. It's a tedious process, but if you don't do that, somebody is just going to drop the ball and the entire program will fail. Trust is very individual, Matty. It's not something that it's easily built. Just because you're HR, people are not going to come and run to you.
I would actually argue that it's the contrary because of what you described earlier, that there's this stress of talking to a manager who has not your best interest at heart and maybe not understanding the bigger picture of, if I'm a great talent, I'm going to be taken care of because the organization wants me. And also, you said it yourself, there are few talents in the organization. You have few top talents. So most of the organization would be not so excited about talking to HR because they might not feel themselves as a top talent. I don't know. I'm just making...
To be honest with you, it all depends on how HR is perceived, which is, I constantly feel, and in most companies I've been to, I had to rebrand HR.
Into what?
Change the perception from being XYZ or the previous person was XYZ. I had to put in a lot of effort to create the awareness of what HR really is. And fortunately or unfortunately, all of that has to do heavily on HR leader. If you have an HR leader that is very nice, almost like mommy, and she or he would listen to everything you're saying, but not do anything about it. They take care of you, but then sometimes you need more than just taking care of. And then you're labeled such a thing. It's very different. And I think to a large extent, the target operating model has got a lot to do as well. If you keep stressing that the HR purpose is the business, then it's very different to just taking care of employees. In some organizations, they see HR as just people, taking care of people. In those situations, they don't even come to you. They come to you if they feel that they need to have better benefits, but not a role. It really depends on how the HR department is being perceived.
When you talked about trust, you said it's very personal. What is it that is not personal or a technique that we could learn from you? So if you need to teach other HRs to build trust, how do you do it?
The first thing is, I think it's integrity. It's always doing the right thing even when no one's watching. Always voicing out on things that even though you aren't popular. HR's role is not to be popular in a company. A lot of people make that mistake. Having an opinion, just like any other function. If, for example, your head of HR is very particular about performance management, and some people become very passionate about, do we have the bell curve, yes or no, and all that. But if you have a head of HR who's very business driven, who wants to develop the business and to reward those who make it happen, then you know, for example, that individual is very business savvy. Then you have certain heads of HR who are just doing the back end work of what the others decide. And by that, I mean, okay, they don't get involved in calibration of your performance reviews or your talent reviews. They just accept the numbers from the CEO and then work out the bonuses. So employees know who has a voice and who doesn't, and who listens to that voice. This is based on my experience. And if you don't have it, it's also very important to understand, how do you develop it?
So it's having a voice and then being able to have this voice listened. But first you need to have a voice. You need to have an opinion. You need to
be bold enough to have a voice. And that's the tough part. Many individuals are a little skeptical about voicing out. I don't know how long you've been in Asia, but there is a perception that if you ask too many questions or if you disagree to too many things, your job's in danger. I don't know. Maybe you might not be popular, but I can't see how your job can be in danger. HR cannot be the popular person in the company. Like you said, we wear so many hats. And sometimes employees don't understand why we behave in a certain way because we can't always be nice. We also wear the policeman's hat, like it or not. Disciplining individuals, employees is also part and parcel of what we do. We can't always be Santarinas and Santa Clauses because we want to just give away things. Sometimes you do that and sometimes you have to discipline people as well. But what's important is about transparency and fairness to make sure the facts speaks for itself. At least that's what you can base it on rather than trying to take sides when you don't have. And that's why having data is so critical. Having HR analytics, the matrices make a big difference. So people can't accuse you of making decisions out of nothing. The more data savvy you are and you are able to slice it properly and use that for the decisions you make, they know that you're not being personal or you're not taking sides. That has helped a lot. But that's the other problem. If you're not automated, if you don't have systems, your data is all manually gathered. One, it's never ready on time for your decision making. Or two, it's incorrect. So it's also about ensuring that you have the right data and collation of that data has to be done properly as well.
Okay, when I told you about the indirect impact, if measured and long-term impact, we talked about talent development and we took specific cases. What do you think when it comes to the question of retention? You spoke about an organization that might be losing their top talent. So it's more like I don't know if it's a culture or an atmosphere, but it's not one individual. It might be multifactorial. When it comes to topics of broader, more abstract engagement, happiness, whatever you want to call it for the team, how do you mobilize resources? And you have experience in multinational companies. I would imagine that those companies are maybe more forward-looking and they implement programs that are probably more advanced than most other businesses. What's your take on, it doesn't have to be smaller business, but maybe businesses that are a bit more conservative. They might be very big, but they've not implemented the latest DEI and other things you talked about earlier. So they are more like, okay, we have payroll in place. Maybe we have automated some of the admin, but performance management seems a long way. And talent and engagement, we are not even thinking about it. It's like, let's first implement OKRs maybe next year kind of thing.
I'll give an example. It's the work from home. We are post-COVID. COVID has taught us a lot on flexible working arrangements. Today in interviews, and I was a group CPO at a public listed company in technology just 2-3 years ago. The first question they asked us was, is this job hybrid or do we need to come to the office? And this is tech. Now, I think it's very important for us to realize for retention, it's not just the performance of the individual. It takes two to tango. I think as organizations, leadership teams, we need to understand what is the generation, the multi-generational workforce we have. What do they want? We need to know that. I remember when I was at RBC, we did a survey. We executed the FlexiBen. Why? Because we've spent a lot of money in hiring, training people. If we can help it, we don't want to lose them. Now, if they are not interested in what they do, or if they're not good enough, that's a different story. But we don't want to lose people. If we can help it, we didn't want to lose people. So for that, we had to understand what the different levels of generation would want in their jobs. At that point, it was more Gen Y, the Gen X, the boomers.
Yeah.
So we also needed to understand what do these different levels of generations want from their workplace, apart from a good salary and all the la-di-da stuff. Today, a lot of that has got to do with the flexibility of work. Working from home in many organizations is just something that they'll try to completely avoid. Many people had tried to go back to pre-COVID, as if COVID never happened, is work from home never happened. But that's where we're wrong. The more we push that, we might lose the people we need. I'm not saying allow people to work from home 3 times a week or 2 times a week, but at least do something. Have one Friday or one Wednesday or a fortnight work from home. Try to understand that perspective as well. there are so many other areas that requires us to be a little bit more understanding about what needs to be done. And working from home is not at the expense of not performing. If your OKRs or KRAs are clear and you're not a cashier at a supermarket, you can still make sure that those objectives are met if you work very closely with your team. So it's what results that matters, not where you do it. So that's an example where many organizations are trying to see if they can make an exemption or give in to maybe 1 day a week or 1 day every 2 weeks to work from home. It's helped a lot of women return to work as well. I mean, the returnship programs. And it also provides the flexibility of organizations when employees need them. It helps. And it helps the perception and of an employee about the organization. It's not just about, oh, I got 6 months bonus and all the monetary stuff and things that you can measure. Sometimes those intangible stuffs matter as well. It is important to understand what is different in 2025 compared to, 2018, 2019, and evolve. And this thing is never going to be a one-size-fits-all or, oh, I decided this in 2018, it worked then. COVID has taught us a huge lesson that is the flexibility, and people now really care about home, being back home, being able to spend time with their loved ones, their family. That whole discussion on work-life balance is now on a completely different level. I know people who give up jobs before they find a job, they just resign. That's something that's unheard of in the past. You would never leave a job without something in hand. You would never put in that letter. But today, if it gets too much, it is also about toxic workplaces. When you feel that something is beyond your control and you really have no control, the only way out is you have to get out. We need to take a very good view about understanding what's within the organization. How has the culture in the organization changed? How should we be looking at things for our employees? This is, of course, on top and in addition to, you still have to make sure that you're paying well, whether you are on a 75 percentile or 50, whatever you decide, you still have to be an organization that they want to work in. Mati, Malaysia has always been one of those countries where we've always had a 3.2, 3.5% unemployment. But these are not actual unemployment rates. These are people moving from job A to job B. It's not like you have no jobs there. It's a choice we make. And I think globally, I take care of APAC, even whether it's India, I was in India a couple of months ago. People care about themselves and their families now, and they are bold enough to say it out loud. If a job is going to require them to sacrifice a lot of this, then they would think twice about it, even though the money is good. Of course, we're not talking about blue-collar workers here. But on average, if you've got talents, and I can tell you, when we used to do talent review, we will be very, very happy if we have 5 people on that list.
5 in percentage, how much is it?
5, just 5.
But in percentage of the total organization that you're looking at?
See, the 5 would only be for the -2s. We're not talking about the entire organization could be about 13,000, 14,000, but where we focused was the -1 and -2s. If we can get 5, we were happy.
Out of, in the pool, you have 20, 30?
25, 30?
So 20%, a bit less.
Because it was very hard to ensure that they pass the prerequisites that we need in order to put them onto the list. And some of them won't be even assuming the roles, not until the next review, which is like in 12 months. And if you don't have 5 of them, we get questioned. And this is where the matrix comes in. So when you have matrix, you're also questioned on the quality of the hiring that we're doing because they're interrelated. So going back to your short-term and long-term impact from that perspective, here I think retention today strategies is a lot different from in the past. In the past, in most companies I was in, we were very clear and adamant about what we want. And if you can't fit in, if you don't want to fit in, then that's okay. But today I know in many organizations, they do what they can to ensure that we take into account some of this. Except the only thing sometimes we forget is we need to make sure that it is for all and not just for one. So whatever changes or whatever exemptions you're doing, it needs to reflect as a policy rather than an exception to the general rule.
So instead of something very abstract, you give me real use cases or real life examples. What I heard from you on the retention, building the case for those programs that would help, is not to be abstract and thinking, okay, what do people need? And then making sure we deliver on those needs that they have, whether it's different generations or different subpopulation, but making sure we give them what they need. And you link it to business outcome with the retention numbers or the succession planning that you need to do. All these things are linked. So when you think about those problems, you have all these data points. And that I imagine that it happens at the CHRO level. You can't do it at any other level.
No, you really do need to have that ability to slice and dice that information. But I think the other part to this, Matty, as well, is how serious are you in your retention? Because many organizations feel it's probably better to just go find new people rather than retaining them. So it really is very much dependent on different organizations. If this is what they want to do. I know in most multinationals, the retention is very key. And that's why we even have rewards plans to ensure retention, like LTIPs. We have LTIPs to keep people, right? And many of those country-based individuals are then open to regional roles and even global roles. So you have a purpose in ensuring that the entire organization, not just in a country, is properly managed. But there's also a situation where you have not all organization. I'm also talking about GLCs here that might have very clear and transparent internal mobility plans. Because when you have no internal mobility plans, that means promotions can happen as and when. There's no proper process to it. So hence it becomes very questionable. How did you promote someone who wasn't even on the grid, for example? And in some situations, you have the performance of the individual taken as the absolute gospel truth, and you don't care about potential. I know it's very challenging to define potential, but today's performance does not guarantee tomorrow's performance in another role until and unless you're able to define the characteristics of what potential means for your organization or your sector. You might be a fantastic finance manager or a financial controller, but it doesn't automatically mean you're the next CFO. And sometimes we have a habit of just promoting people and not even discussing it with them because we just assume everybody's just waiting to be promoted. That's something I learned when we actually started discussing during talent reviews. What do they want to do? It was quite surprising to see their wish lists. Organizations have done a lot of assumptions over the years, which has resulted in impacting retention. It's only when you are able to look at this overall, then you would have a better picture or a better strategy.
Okay, cool. Mindset versus skill. What do you think you do? You do capacity building, mindset being reframing how we think about things, the beliefs. How important are both? Do you focus more on mindset? Do you focus more on knowledge? And how do you do mindset interventions in your capacity building right now at Promeritus? And how did you take care of this as a CHRO?
I'm one of those people from day one. I've always looked at the person rather than the skill. Because if you're someone who's got the right attitude, agile, going the extra mile, unless you are really in nuclear science, then you can pick it up. For me, skill is something you can be taught, provided you're open to it. I have been focusing a lot on the mindsets, the individuals. I have seen people grow from an assistant manager, my assistant manager in Comp and Ben, to a CHRO today. And I remember when I hired her then, I knew she will move up the ladder pretty quickly if she maintains this. You need to have the aspiration. So that's all part of the mindset. And you got to be somebody who's willing to go the extra mile to prove yourself. I think from that perspective, whoever you're going to upskill, cross-skill, reskill, will do a fantastic job if they want to. And I think it's also about the purpose. There's something that I remember we didn't do that before, but today I do that. I talk about purpose a lot. I want to know what they want to do in long term. I want to know what are the things that they believe in. What do they like doing? And I want to see if Pro Emeritus can be one of their stops. I don't think anybody can expect individuals to stay forever, never, never. But if we can be one of their journeys, part of their journey, I think that's very good. But it all depends on mindset. It sounds like it's not very black and white. There's a lot of shades of gray, but the people are gray. And it helps you recruit the right people for your culture. And then, of course, to retain them. Mindsets are very important. And I'm also a social and emotional intelligence certified coach, Matty. So now more than ever. And we also have a profiling called the SEIP that I use a lot in understanding how self-aware are they before they get into anything else. I think that's very key. And self-awareness is one of the key issues in most situations. Everybody's busy judging people around them. They forget about themselves. What do they want? How aware are they of what are the things that's important to them?
Interesting. We talked about AI a tiny bit when we talked about the difficulty of being a one person HR team. We spoke about automation and then you spoke about AI. I cannot have you here and not ask you about how you see AI changing the world in HR. I think that's the main question that I see every time on stage. What do you think is the best way to leverage AI today in HR, if at all? And how do you see the next 12 months? Because we can't see, it's very hard actually to see the next 3, but let's talk about the next 12.
I think AI has been very scary and it's very intimidating to many. And I think particularly in HR. But I'm one of those people who believe that AI is something we train. So we must know what we want AI for. I mean, if you're trying to compete with AI on the transactional work or the menial stuff, don't bother. They will do a fantastic job. But I also think that it's a good opportunity in HR to self-reflect and understand. If you are in a transactional phase, it's important to understand what you want to do in HR, upskill accordingly, and move on. So you got to move the transactional piece to let AI do a fantastic job. Now, whether it's onboarding, whether it is managing recruitment and talent acquisition. But I'm also one of those firm believers that we need to coexist, AI and humans. But you need to know what's your core competency because you know what AI can do. And I don't think AI is here to do everything. I mean, it's like recruitment. A lot of people tend to leave the entire shortlisting to be done by AI without any human intervention. No panel discussion. I can't remember, was it Amazon who did that? And they all came out with male candidates because the AIs just took on whatever historic data they had. Like that, I think it's important to know where you need AI to help you to get more efficient, more effective. But it also means humans need to go back to the drawing board and see where they need to upskill themselves in areas they can complement each other. And we're not doing that, okay? Yes, it can be a very cost-effective way of working in a long-term perspective, but it's also cost, Matty. SMEs can't afford that. Do you know HR was the last department where it would be digitalized? Finance will have their ERPs, supply chain, you name it. But HR will always be the last, even in multinationals, except for one or two. When you have that scenario, the question is, will they include AI in HR as well, like the other functions? But I think AI...
Is it comes last? Why is it that
as
HR
in
is
the last department to invest for digitalization?
Why?
Because they see HR as cost. They don't see HR as a means of doing better. They see HR as cost. So when HR is cost, why do we need to have automation there? It's just cost. It's mindset.
Okay.
Right? But today with AI, I think it applies to all functions almost immediately. You don't even need to take turns. But it is an area that people need to understand that they shouldn't be competing with AI in the stuff that's going to be very, very transactional. I can see payroll going in that direction in a heartbeat. Talent acquisition, I think all the recruitment aspect where you need to ensure the whatever algorithms they have, is there to ensure that there is consistency. I think you should do it. Same with onboarding. The personalized onboarding sessions that I've seen, I remember seeing one of that before. That was very good because my onboarding was your onboarding. it takes into account some of the areas that I need more time on. I might be less numeric than you would be. So it focuses on the areas which involves more numbers for me versus not for you. Like you might focus on something completely different. That's very good. I've always digitalized HR. I remember in my first job as the HR director in a retail organization back in 2003, I had integrated time and attendance system to the payroll because we were so fiercely calculating FTEs on a weekly basis. And we used the Amano hand punch. We're not even talking about thumbprint, we're talking about a hand punch. It automatically integrates to payroll. This is 2003, by the way. I've always believed in HR being more technology, is having more technology, more automation, because we can then focus on the people. I actually remember at the awards thing, there was a lady that I was sitting with at lunch who said, do you know, I think any AI would be far friendlier than my HR people. So I think whether you're finance, whichever department you're in, I think technology is the way to go. That's going to keep changing, right? You're shifting technologies. You need to grab them and you need to be less intimidated by them, because the more you have sufficient automation in the work you do, it gives you time, it gives you room for you to develop skills in other areas, particularly when you're dealing with people. Look at the whole mental wellness issues that's cropping up in schools and even workplaces, because people don't talk so much. There isn't enough interventions. We don't talk to people. It's a tick on the list for us. Same as HR. Everybody is busy ticking the list. I decided to do the certification, the coaching certification in social emotional intelligence, because I felt the human in HR was depleting. We just don't care. We just care about the list. While technology can do that, I think we should just go back to being humans.
Yeah, that's a hopeful message for everyone, saying we don't have jobs in the future because AI will replace everything. That kind of connection.
Yeah, because everybody's busy saying that, right? I mean, everybody is busy intimidating the other. The government's doing that. Big multinationals, tech companies are doing that. But I don't think they just started this. They've been saying this for a long time. But I do believe that those individuals who've been doing admin and jobs where it's a repetitive shared services, I can see AI being involved in shared services a lot. But this is where it's important for you to develop skills or to upskill yourself in areas where you can be valuable. You got to know what that is.
The follow-up to AI, and then I have one last question and I'll let you go, I promise. Follow-up is,
Okay.
What is the future of work, according to you? So you spoke about one thing that caught my attention. You spoke about the talent review, and then you said, look, we would have the next one 12 months later. And in my world of future of work, just giving you an example to help you visualize with me what I would mean, there's way more liquidity, fluidity in the talent management, in the type of projects. So if I look at the future, I would love to see humanity plug into projects and plug into organizations way quicker. So obviously within organizations, which is not the case. Most of the time it's very rigid. You have your role, your function, and it's hard to move. And then ideally it happens across organizations. And if you have a talent for coaching, then why be stuck with one organization? Why be stuck in a country? And we could specialize even more, as you just said. But that's why also the question comes again, because you spoke about finding your niche or finding your skill where you are the best one in Malaysia, in the world, and you're valued for that. That would be my vision of one of the aspects of future work that I would like to see, is this kind of decentralization and blossoming of each and every individual in that decentralization. How do you see the future of work? What is the key thing that is important for you in that future of work?
I think firstly, we need to get comfortable with tech, automation, AI. We just need to get comfortable in general. That's very important. 2, because today is AI, tomorrow it could be something else. It's always going to get better and there will be changes. I like what you said about humanizing. So I think while AI and all these technologies coming into support, human needs to go back to being humans. So we can create that humane workplace in organizations, in schools. I see a huge coexistence between people and AI to get things done. So even if you are an SME or a micro SME, you might not need as many people. And again, AI is not just HR, it's everywhere. In terms of actual future work, I would like to see, to be honest, humanizing policies for people, whether it is for the various workforce generational, and in terms of hybrid working, things like that. It's also very important for us to understand what are the new skills we need to have moving forward. For HR, what I normally say, before you get involved in AI and all that, please ensure that you possess the core competencies in HR. Because you can't help train AI, all the algorithms, if you don't know the basic 101 of HR. And I don't mean governance. So hence why it's very important for us in HR to know exactly what we're doing and to know exactly what works and what doesn't because somebody else done it. Or can we tweak it for Southeast Asia or Malaysia? And the whole employee engagement, employee experience, employee well-being will become as important for everyone. And these are all part and parcel of the retention. Because if you don't have any intention to retain your people, then you will end up spending more and more money on the recruitment cycle. Because today you have contract staff, you have permanent, but the whole gig economy is coming as well. How open are you to have the same people working for you, also working possibly with your competitor? And what else can we do? A huge believer of DEI, despite what's happening in the US. I think we need to accept people as they are. Now, whether that involves ethnicity, gender, neurodiversity, we just have to accept people as they are and to include them in what we do. I think that's what AI really is, in addition to having human-centric skills. Human-centric skills will always be about the creative thinking or the ability to solve problems, agility, flexibility, and all of that. But DEI, as you know, in Malaysia, actual DEI will be tough because there are certain restrictions on certain hiring in terms of ethnicity. I think we've done pretty well in the gender space, but I'm also one of those, I know lots of women are going to hate me for saying this, but I also believe, don't pick me because I'm a woman, but pick me, I'm as good as the other guy. So while there are so many initiatives to help women get in, we should not forget about the merits. So whether we have the 30% for women, but that 30% should not be just picking the women to just represent the 30%, but they should be as good as all the other guys in that room. So those are some of my areas. But the only other thing that I think is also going to be there for life is the whole lifelong learning. That's going to stay. In fact, I just launched that for one of my clients just earlier this week in terms of trying to change the mindsets of the people on learning and not prompted by the management of the company. How do you view learning? You might not have to pay for it in Malaysia. That's the lucky thing. Being Malaysian, you have the levy, it's probably paid for. But if you were anywhere else, something you invest in yourself.
Yeah, love it. And one more minute before the time you said, but I kept it for the end because I find it funny. So what is HR? I thought that talking for an hour and 40 minutes without asking the question was funny. So usually the terms are not clear. And so I have an expert. How do you define HR?
It's just a way of making sure the people that we hire, the people that we have chosen for different roles, have the right core competency to deliver and to ensure an organization is successful by making sure also that the entire business objective is met to the people. And that's why what it was personnel in the 60s became HR, it was human capital, and then now I'm also hearing there's people and culture. But what I'm not too excited is making the HR folks to be accountable for all people, because I still believe that heads of departments still need to manage their own people. So they need to be responsible for their people, the growth of the people. If somebody in IT doesn't get promoted, although he's been there very long and he's fantastic, that's not HR, but that's the head of IT. So the managing of people, driving productivity, I think it's a win-win. So HR is able to do that. Now, where HR fails is they take the brunt of it. They take the brunt, meaning if something doesn't happen, so if the IT guy doesn't get promoted, oh, it's HR's fault and HR agrees with it. Okay. I think that is no longer the case. You'll be amazed how much of HR promotions I do with people, even within universities, because it's so sad. People think HR is just payroll. None of the career talks I've done in Asia involved HR, an interest in HR. Not a single person has ever told me in a university they want to be a CHRO. Not one. Either we're all doing something seriously wrong about trying to get people to understand what HR is all about. I think these are some of the things that needs to change. You can call HR anything you like, but trying to make HR professionals the mothers and the dads of people and just taking care like mother hens, I think that is wrong. That's not HR. One of our hats is giving the care, but we're not the only one involved in that. What's your HR? What's HR for you, Maddie, from the outside world?
It has changed quite a bit. I was very frustrated with HR as a client of yours, as a team leader, as an employee, as a team leader, as a director. And then I started to do some consulting and transformation. And I realized my point of contact with HR, because the CEO, those things are usually run with the HR team. At least that was the case in the organizations I touched. I started to meet HR I had to convince them to work with me. So it was interesting. And then I had to empathize with their problems in order to help them resolve their own problems, because otherwise you can't sell something if you don't understand their world. And then I joined brioHR. Now I'm offering services or software in order to automate the workforce administration you talked about, so that they can do performance management and talent engagement. So now I see HR more as a community of people that I want to serve after trying to serve them for a different purpose of transformation. And to me, I agree with your definition. I feel like I could talk about the life cycle of the employee and basically being able to empower or enable this life cycle. I think creating a win-win is the right definition. I mean, maybe three wins. For the clients and the community, for the organization and for each employee. I think that's what needs to be done. To me, it's about having those conversations, understanding it, creating the blueprints, which is something you're doing with Promeritus and the HRCI that it didn't know before.
HRCI, yes.
Yeah, having the blueprint, understanding it, and then how do we automate the parts that are not interesting, repeating, and then how do we do the human thing, where we get to the bottom of, this is what I need, this is what you need, okay, let's do this win-win deal individually, we do it across the organization, everyone is happy for a limited amount of time, because we don't want to be 20 years in the same organization, most likely, and yeah, hopefully it works. That's how I feel about it.
Yeah. It does help if HR is more business savvy, though.
Yeah.
It helps in the part that I think getting accepted is a lot easier when you are commercially savvy.
I think it's what I did with HR myself. It's like being curious and try to understand their business. And you do the same with me, for instance, with my go-to-market. You try to understand my go-to-market. You'll understand what kind of people I need. And most of the time, I think it's the problem we talked about earlier. There's not enough time in the day to do everything you need. And your workforce administration is not automated. So you're struggling. And if we go there, I'm going to ask you one question, and then hopefully we can have a coffee or something. But my belief with software, and I'm a marketer. So for me, the way I would have trained my teams, especially on the digital marketing side and AI for marketing and all these aspects, usually the best software providers have the best training. So if you want to be the best digital person, at least maybe 10 years ago, I don't know about this now. My team knows, but I no longer know. I think it's Google Analytics, Google AdWords. You would use the Meta or Facebook ad training. You would do HubSpot certification. And if you do like a few of those big software firms, you would have understood how to do marketing online. I think HR, you have the same opportunity. If you do take an HRMS that is good, would you agree with that? Or would you say, no, it needs to start somewhere else? Because that's the hack I did as a marketing director, my first time. It's like, where can I get the knowledge quickly from someone I trust, and then I can use the tool itself. And because they teach the process that will work on the system, then it's very quick. Would you agree that's a good hack, or would you take it in a different way? The training through the system.
I mean, I'm open to whichever way, to be honest, because not everybody can learn in one particular way. There's no one hard and fast rule. If that works for you as an individual or a group of people, that's fine. As long as the learning happens, and as long as you can use that learning and put that into practice, learning can happen in so many ways. And today we're very fortunate. You can do almost everything online. And in fact, most of our programs, we started in 2021 for HRCI programs. We start everything through instructor-led virtual sessions. And today, it's such a useful tool. So people don't need to come from Penang to KL or from Sabah to KL for these programs. It's also cost-effective. It's all about what works. I think we all have to be self-aware of what works for us. What works for you might not work for me and vice versa. So I think this is where the whole self-awareness sets in. You just need to know what works for you. As long as you know that this is something that's going to help you get into that whole lifelong learning. That's what matters. And tomorrow, I also think that the borders are vanishing slowly, maybe with ASEAN, tomorrow maybe globally. There's so many things that we never thought could be possible, could be very, very possible. But I think the role of HR, to be honest, since the pandemic has also included things like health, safety, and security globally. And this was unfamiliar areas for HR when pandemic happened. It's like getting a ball thrown at you and say, okay, now you take care of this. So I wouldn't be too worried as HR that our jobs are going to be taken away by air. These are areas that you can just get in pretty quickly. All it means is, Maddie, if you are in HR, you better love it. You better love people. All those people hiding behind their desk and back-end offices and laptops and say they are HR, I think that's going to end soon.
Love it. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Take care. Have a great weekend.
I'll see you. Take care.